First story. So, this all started a couple of years ago when my neighbor, Dave, knocked on my door with this half-embarrassed, half-panicked look on his face. Now, Dave's the kind of guy who's always up for a beer on the weekend but wouldn't know the difference between a spark plug and a socket wrench if it bit him. He's friendly but clueless when it comes to anything mechanical. He had this old, beat-up Honda Civic sitting in his driveway for months. It wasn't running, and I guess he finally decided to try and get it back on the road, but something went wrong. Apparently, he tried to change the oil by himself after watching a YouTube video and, in classic Dave fashion, stripped the oil pan bolt. He didn't realize what had happened until all the oil was on his driveway. I'm not a mechanic, but I've always tinkered with cars in my free time. My dad taught me the basics when I was younger, and I've done small repairs and maintenance on my own vehicles ever since. It's not something I'd call a hobby, more like a necessity when you drive an older car. Anyway, I figured I could help Dave out, especially since the guy seemed genuinely stressed. I went over, took a look, and yep, the bolt was trashed. I had to run to the local auto parts store for a new one, but that was easy enough. When I got back, I fixed the oil pan issue, put in some fresh oil, and got his Civic running again. The whole thing took maybe an hour, tops. Dave was beyond grateful, offering me money, which I refused because, honestly, it wasn't that big of a deal. I told him, just buy me a beer sometime. He seemed relieved and agreed. I thought that was the end of it. A week later, my doorbell rings, and it's another neighbor, Laura, standing there with this sheepish grin. She told me Dave mentioned I own new cars, and asked if I could help her out. Apparently, her minivan was making a weird noise, and she wasn't sure if it was something serious. Now, I didn't want to become the neighborhood car guy, but she was nice about it, and I didn't want to seem like a jerk, so I agreed to take a look. Long story short, it was just a loose heat shield. I tightened it up in about 10 minutes, and she was good to go. Once again, I was offered cash, and once again, I turned it down. I thought, okay, 2 favors, no big deal. But it didn't stop there. The next weekend, another neighbor, Greg, knocks on my door. This time, it's a brake issue with his SUV. I tried to decline, I really did. But he looked so desperate, and I could hear his kid screaming from the car. So, I helped him out too. That job took a little longer because his rotors were shot, and we had to replace them, but I managed to get it done over a Saturday afternoon. By this point, I was starting to see a pattern. Word had spread, and suddenly I was the guy everyone came to with their car problems. It was honestly kind of ridiculous. One week it was a dead battery, another week someone had trouble with their AC, and on it went. I didn't mind helping out, but it got to the point where people were knocking on my door almost every other day. I even had someone leave a note in my mailbox once, asking if I could take a look at their truck. The worst part was, none of these people ever seemed to take no for an answer. I'd try to politely say I was busy or not up for it, but they'd always give me that pleading look, or worse, mention how Dave or Laura said I was a wizard with cars. It was flattering at first, but after a while, it became overwhelming. I mean, I've got a full-time job and a life outside of fixing people's cars, you know? The tipping point came when this guy I didn't even know, he lived 2 streets over, I think, pulled up to my house and started asking if I could just take a quick look at his truck. He claimed it would only take a second, but I could tell from his vague description that it was something more serious. I told him, firmly this time, that I couldn't help, and he left, but not without giving me this disappointed look, like I'd just ruined his day. That's when I realized I needed to set some boundaries. I didn't mind helping people out once in a while, but this whole neighborhood mechanic thing was getting out of hand. So, I made a point to start declining requests. Politely, of course, but firmly. Some people took it well, others seemed a little annoyed, but it had to be done. It's been a few months now, and the knocks on my door have mostly stopped. Every now and then, someone will ask me about their car, but I've learned to say, sorry, I don't have time for that, and leave it at that. I still help out Dave occasionally, but only because we've become good friends, and he always makes good on that beer promise. Looking back, I can't help but laugh at how one small favor spiraled into this whole neighborhood car repair saga. If there's one lesson I've learned from all this, it's that no good deed goes unpunished, especially if it involves free labor. Second story. So, here's a wild one for you. A couple of weeks ago, I had one of the weirdest days of my life, all because of a random series of misunderstandings that started with a simple trip to grab coffee. It was a Saturday morning, and I decided to hit up my favorite local coffee shop before starting my weekend chores. I'm not a huge coffee snob, but this place makes the kind of cappuccino that's hard to beat. Plus, the weather was great, so I figured I'd take a walk over and enjoy the fresh air. As I was heading to the cafe, I saw this woman sitting on a bench outside the shop, cradling a baby and looking frazzled. She had that look you only see on the face of someone who's been juggling way too much for way too long. You know the one, dark circles under the eyes, hair kind of frizzy, one sock lower than the other. I wasn't planning on stopping, but as I got closer, she made eye contact with me and gave me this kind of pleading look. Before I could react, she said, "Excuse me, could you watch my baby for just 5 minutes? I need to run inside to grab something quick." Now, I'll admit, my first instinct was to say no. I mean, I don't know the first thing about taking care of babies, and the idea of being left alone with one, especially a stranger's baby, was kind of terrifying. But she looked really desperate, like she hadn't had a break in days. Plus, I figured she'd only be gone for a couple of minutes. So, against my better judgment, I said yes. The woman practically sprinted inside the cafe, and there I was, standing awkwardly next to a stroller with this tiny baby staring up at me. I thought, all right, how hard can this be for 5 minutes? I checked my phone, thinking she'd be right back, but as the minutes ticked by, I started getting nervous. 5 minutes turned into 10, then 15. I began to wonder if something had happened to her. Did she get caught up in a long line? Was she okay? By the time 20 minutes passed, I was genuinely concerned. The baby hadn't cried yet, but it was squirming a bit, and I had no idea what to do. People were walking by, giving me these weird looks, probably wondering why some random guy was standing there with a baby stroller. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the woman came rushing out of the coffee shop, apologizing profusely. She explained that she got stuck behind a huge group of customers and the barista was moving at a snail's pace. I wasn't thrilled, but I figured, hey, things happen. She thanked me again and went on her way. I thought that was the end of my adventure. I grabbed my coffee and started heading back home, but about halfway there, my phone buzzed. It was a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, the voice on the other end was frantic. "Hi, is this John? Oh my God, thank you so much for watching my niece earlier, but there's been a huge misunderstanding. My sister thought you were the babysitter I hired for the day." My mind raced. Babysitter? I wasn't a babysitter. I had no idea what was going on, but before I could respond, the woman on the phone was already explaining. Apparently, the lady who'd left me with the baby wasn't the mother, she was the baby's aunt. The actual mother had hired a babysitter to meet her at the coffee shop and look after the baby for the day. Somehow, the aunt had assumed I was that babysitter. She was in such a hurry, she didn't think to ask or double-check, and just handed me the baby, thinking I was there for the job. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I explained that I wasn't a babysitter and had just been a random guy walking by when she asked me for help. There was this long pause on the other end of the line, and then the woman started laughing nervously. "I'm so sorry for the confusion," she said. "But, is there any chance you could actually help out? The real babysitter cancelled last minute, and we're in a bit of a bind." I couldn't believe it. They were seriously asking me, a total stranger, to babysit a kid for the day. At first, I thought about declining. I mean, I had plans, laundry, groceries, maybe catching a movie later. But then I thought about the look on that aunt's face earlier, and I realized these people were really in a tough spot. Plus, the baby had been calm the whole time I was watching her. Maybe it wouldn't be that hard? So, against all common sense, I agreed. Fast forward to me sitting in their living room, watching over this baby for the rest of the afternoon. It was honestly the weirdest experience of my life. The mom gave me a quick rundown on feeding schedules and diaper changes, but to my surprise, the baby was super chill. We hung out, played with some toys, and I even managed to get her to take a nap. I had no idea how I'd ended up in this situation, but there I was, for the next 5 hours, playing the role of babysitter. The family came back around 6 p.m., and they were so thankful, they insisted on paying me for the day. I refused at first, but they were persistent, so I took the money, enough to cover my coffee for the next month, at least. Looking back, it's hilarious how a quick coffee run turned into a full day of babysitting for people I'd never met before. I'm still not entirely sure how I ended up agreeing to it, but I guess sometimes life just throws you into the most unexpected situations. Now, every time I walk past that coffee shop, I can't help but laugh and wonder if they've ever mixed up another random guy for their babysitter. Hopefully, I'm the only one who's had that honor. Third story. About 6 months ago, I found myself in a situation I never imagined, one that involved sweat, blisters, and a grueling 26.2 miles of sheer willpower. And the worst part? I didn't even know I had signed up for it until the morning of the race. Here's how it all went down. I'm a pretty active guy, nothing too crazy, but I like to keep in shape. I hit the gym regularly, go for runs in the park, and occasionally join my friends for pick-up basketball games. But marathons? Never in a million years did I think that was something I'd ever do. Running for hours on end just wasn't my idea of a good time. So, one evening, a friend of mine, Mike, called me up. Mike's one of those guys who's always up for something adventurous, skydiving, rock climbing, you name it. That night, he was all excited about this local fitness event he'd heard about. He made it sound like a chill community run, with food trucks, music, and some kind of fitness challenge. He asked if I wanted to join him, and I thought, why not? A little run followed by some good food and hanging out with friends? Seemed like a decent way to spend a Saturday. I didn't ask too many questions, because, to be honest, I wasn't really paying attention. He mentioned something about signing us both up and sending me the details later. I was in the middle of a work project and figured I'd look into it closer to the date. Fast forward a couple of weeks. It's Friday night, the day before the event. Mike texts me the address and tells me to meet him at 6 a.m. I thought that was a bit early, but figured maybe we'd grab breakfast afterward. I went to bed early and set my alarm, totally unaware of what I was about to get into. The next morning, I show up at the address Mike gave me. As I pull into the parking lot, something starts to feel off. For one thing, there were way more people than I expected, hundreds, maybe even 1,000. And they weren't your average casual runners either. These people looked serious. They were decked out in high-end running gear, with hydration packs, energy gels, and some of the most expensive running shoes I'd ever seen. Meanwhile, I'm standing there in my regular gym clothes and a pair of old sneakers. I finally spot Mike, who's waving at me from a registration tent. When I get closer, he hands me a bib number, like the ones you wear for races. My stomach drops. Mike, I say, trying to sound calm, what exactly did you sign us up for? He gives me this big grin and says, dude, we're running a marathon. I blink at him, completely dumbfounded. A marathon? Like, an actual 26.2-mile marathon? Yep, he says, like it's the most normal thing in the world. I'm standing there, in shock. How could I not have realized? How did I not check the details? I was mentally prepared for a fun run, maybe a 5K, but this? This was an entirely different ballgame. Before I could protest, the announcer started calling for everyone to gather at the starting line. I was about to tell Mike that there was no way I could do this, but then he gave me that determined look of his, the same one he gets before every insane adventure he drags me into. And against all reason, I found myself thinking, what the hell, let's see how far I can go. So there I was, at the starting line of my first ever marathon, with zero training and no idea what I was doing. The race started, and for the first few miles, I felt pretty good. I kept a slow, steady pace, figuring I'd just do what I could and drop out when it got too tough. Mike was ahead of me, in his element, running like he'd been training for months, which, of course, he had. But as the miles ticked by, things started to get rough. Around mile 10, I could feel the blisters forming on my feet. By mile 15, my legs were starting to cramp. I thought about quitting more times than I could count, but every time I considered it, I'd see someone older than me, or someone who looked like they were in way worse shape, just powering through. It was kind of inspiring, in a way. By mile 18, I was running on pure stubbornness. Mike had long since pulled ahead, but there was this group of runners near me who had the same just keep moving mentality. We didn't really talk, but there was this unspoken camaraderie between us. We were all suffering, but we were doing it together. When I hit mile 22, I was completely drained. I honestly thought I was done. But then something weird happened. My legs, which had been killing me for hours, started to go numb. I was so exhausted that I think my body just gave up on sending pain signals. All I knew was that I had come this far, and if I quit now, I'd regret it forever. The last few miles were a blur. I don't even remember crossing the finish line, but I must have, because the next thing I knew, Mike was standing over me, handing me a bottle of water and grinning like an idiot. "Dude, you did it," he said. I just stared at him, too tired to respond. I don't think I've ever been that exhausted in my life. Every part of my body hurt. But somehow, against all odds, I had finished the marathon. Later that day, after a long nap and about a gallon of water, it started to sink in. I had run a marathon. Me. The guy who hadn't run more than 5 miles in years. I couldn't believe it. So, what did I learn from this whole experience? For one, always ask your friends exactly what they're signing you up for. But more importantly, I learned that sometimes, you're capable of a lot more than you think, especially when you have a crazy friend like Mike pushing you to try something you never would have done on your own. I'm not saying I'll be signing up for another marathon anytime soon, but hey, at least I know I can do it.